Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And I would like to propose that we just use the rest of August, because there's only a couple weeks left, to just constantly talk about our upcoming birthday.
Right. And when is that again?
I believe it's September 1st.
September 1st. That's right. So there are only a limited number of shopping days.
Only a limited number of shopping days. Although, I mean, I can't really speak for both of us, but I could go like...
always spoken for both of us.
Okay.
Are you stopping now?
No. Fie on that. No, I think instead of, in lieu of presents,
yes,
people should just share our podcast with their friends. Like if everyone told one person, like, you have to listen to this podcast.
Absolutely. And what they could do is they could post, "Happy birthday, Jody and Elliot. I shared your podcast."
Or they could do that. Or they could say, "Happy birthday, Jody and Elliot. Here's their podcast." Well, we're being shameless.
Yeah. But just to let us know.
Year? So I'm going to be 45. Isn't 45 the year of the shameless birthday gift?
So I've been shameless for like a decade now.
Oh, gotcha. Well, there you go. So
yeah, well.
Anyway. All right. So we mentioned last time, we talked a little bit about how much we appreciate the engagement in our Facebook group. So I want to take just a second to, he's not our newest member, but we had some confusion about what his name was. So before I welcomed him personally to the group, I just heard back from him, Jacob Engel.
Okay,
has joined the group a little while ago. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, if you go to sohere'smystory.com, there's a link right up in the top right corner to check out the Facebook group. You can also find links there to listen directly if you aren't already subscribed, or you can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms.
Your favorite podcast
All your favorite platforms.
I knew one of us were going to mess that up.
All your favorite podcast
That's hard to say.
Podcast platforms.
It's very hard to say.
Apparently. Why don't you thank our sponsors? Because I have a story to tell. Okay.
As always, we'd like to thank Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions.
So here's my story. As you know, but maybe not everyone knows. So I am married to an architect.
I do know that.
You do. And we have a house. He's not a residential architect, but he is an architect nonetheless. And we have a house. And so there's an interesting thing about architects that if you're not married to one, you may not know this.
And I am not.
Nikki will be relieved to know that you're not also married to an architect. So architects like to do things the right way. I mean, as you can imagine, if you're married to an accountant, they like your taxes to be in order. So when it comes to like house projects and whatnot, interestingly, I have a lot of female friends who, wish their husband cared more about, how things were in the house or whatever. And mine cares a lot. So that always comes with both pros and cons. But when it comes to like how we do things, about whether we, if we're dealing with a roof issue or a HVAC issue, the air conditioning or something, like Paul always likes to do things all the way right, which is really funny. This is a distinction that will come out in the story. So I don't consider myself a corner cutter. Like I'm not somebody who likes to just duct tape something together and leave it. Like right. I consider myself as somebody who likes to do things right the first time, so you don't have to go back and do them again. But apparently that is a relative measure.
Some things are more right than others.
Well, some things are like what I can only come to say is like all the way right. And so I have a good story about this. Okay. So, but that was kind of the backstory, or else like with all couple stories, the actual story is almost irrelevant in and of itself. It's that it comes with like a choo-choo train of past stories.
Context and baggage.
And baggage that goes with it.
Which is going to be the name of my autobiography, by the way.
All right. Well, this one has to do with like bamboo wars. So this house that we own has not one, but two sizable bamboo forests on our property. And by forest, I mean, these bamboo poles, they're like 40, 50 feet tall. Each piece of bamboo is like, not the new ones, obviously, but there are always new ones growing. Most of them are a good, not circumference, diameter, like 2-3 inches in diameter. I mean, these are like structural pieces of bamboo. And we also have a stream in our backyard. And the relationship between these two things is that the part of the bamboo that grows down by the stream / river, because it's prone to like flash flooding kind of stuff.
That's good, especially for now, this time of year.
Oh my Lord, you have no idea. Hence the reason we're working out there, because if we don't keep the bamboo cleared back from the water, when the water does rise, because the bamboo is so solid, it catches twigs and sticks, and then it ends up becoming a dam, and then the water can come up around our house, which is far away from the water, but not if you build a handy little dam that can like say, hey, water, come hang out at the Hume house. So yes, with all the intense rains on the East Coast this year, it has become ever more important that we keep that bamboo cleared all the way back. But like I said, this is 40-foot bamboo. And so, you chop one stick down, and then you have to chop it up in tiny pieces to be able to even make a pile out of it, and it doesn't break down very easily. So getting rid of the bamboo that we cut down is a constant project. And so you cut down one piece and it's like a 20, and we had like 50 pieces that needed to be cut back. So I said, and here's where the story sort of splits. There's another part of the area of this one forest that we aren't looking to clear right now, and it's just going to sit there. So I tend to triage things into like layers of good enough. So normally I wouldn't suggest we just chop down the bamboo and stick it somewhere, because then that's a problem for later. So that's not my normal MO. But we had tons of rain coming this week, and we're trying to make sure the water's back far enough. So I was like, in the interest of getting this cleared, because not only do we have to cut down the bamboo, there actually was there's a flood debris fence dam basically around the bottom of all this bamboo. So we had to get it out of the way and then break down the little, piles of stuff so that it would wash away, which seemed like the higher priority. And I said, why don't we just cut these down and push them over that way in a stack over there where we're not trying to clear right now, and come back for them another day or whatever. Well, Paul's like, no, he's like, that's just a problem we'll have to deal with later. We really should just do it right. And I'm like, right. So of course, and then my hackles come up, because the insinuation is I don't want to do it right. I'm just, I'm like cutting corners or whatever. I was like, no, but like, this is more like right now we need to get this part done, because the other part of this is we're getting tired. We've been at it for a while. We're tired. It's hot. We're being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Like, I don't think we have enough get up and go to finish it all the way. So I want to do this sort of like what to him seems like a halfway thing. And of course, I'll spare you all the details of where the conversation went from there. It was wildly childish and, whatever. But this distinction about how good enough you do things, and like there being levels of good enough, is something that's actually been coming up a lot with clients lately. And it reminds me of kind of one of my very first hard business lessons that I got to learn by watching someone else, which was, very early on, preparing a marketing brochure, and I was just helping. And she was trying to finish it down to the level of like, she decided that the page numbers were like in the wrong place on the page. So she wanted to reprint a bunch of the pages. And at the end of the day, that proposal didn't, this is one of those, like, it has to be there Tuesday by 3:00 things. And we ended up getting it there at like 3:03 because of fixing these page numbers. And that blared in my mind of this, some things are important, except when they're not important. And so I don't know, is that something that you, like, how do you see because it's different than just setting priorities. I think
it's different than setting priorities. The first thing is, I think good enough, the whole concept, the whole discussion of good enough comes with a lot of baggage, because the first person to propose the idea of good enough runs the risk of
getting the look labeled, Paul gave them on Saturday.
Yes, but of being labeled as somebody who doesn't care about quality, or doesn't, some character defect.
Cut corners and who literally like swoop things under the rug.
Right. There's a character defect associated with good enough. And in my world, there are two examples that I had when that came to mind when you were talking. One is something that's very real in my world, and I think in any world where you do a lot of work by the hour. And that is one of my colleagues with whom I worked for a very long time, just a brilliant, brilliant attorney, but he would always go mountain climbing over molehills because there was this issue, and he's exactly right. If you wanted to be 100% thorough, if you wanted to be a missile defense system and you wanted to catch every inbound projectile, you would address every single one of them. But certain of these things were duds. They were known to be duds. They would not do any damage. And in real terms, the client is going to pay for 100% effective missile defense system when in this particular instance, 75% would win the case. And so we had to have constant talks about that. And it's a real issue. And I didn't like being placed in the position or being viewed as somebody that was not as professional or as caring about professional excellence or as zealous in my advocacy or whatever, so that's one part. Another thing that came to mind, and you were involved in this actually, is when my son David was doing some graphic design work, and it was a small project, but it was the first one that he was doing for this company that you were working with. And you just needed something very simple. But for him, it was the first thing that he was doing. And he figured, geez, if I do something really simple, if I do good enough, which really would have been
totally have been good enough.
Totally have been what you asked for.
I prior to him being available, I was going to handwrite it.
Yeah. So if he did good enough, though, well, then that would show that he didn't really care, or maybe he didn't really have the ability to do excellent, or maybe he just all those things piling on.
Yeah.
And so I think good enough is not just hard to achieve; it's a hard conversation to have.
I 100, because if he'd said do you really need this to be really good? That would make him sound like
make him sound like he didn't care and he's trying to get out of things.
Because no one wants to sound like you're suggesting you half-ass it. That is not the suggestion. Right. It's more sort of this kind of triaging diagnostic test of what's good. And I'll tell you where I really see this become problematic in companies. And this is another double-edged sword kind of conversation, is I get a little bristly sometimes at how often scale is used in decision-making processes.
What do you mean?
So I often hear a growing company need a system for something that has started to grow bigger than just being able to kind of keep track of it in your head or something. Right. And so they're like, okay, well, we need a system. But then they always get into this, but it will need to be able to scale.
Oh, right.
We have to be able to, if there were 20 of us, how would that work? Or, well, someday I won't be doing all this myself. So, I need to make sure it works when when I have an entire team hired out. And again, I sometimes feel this pressure about how I feel the advice sounds, because what I worry it sounds like is somehow saying that you're not supposed to think about scale, because you can paint yourself into a corner. If you organize an entire business around things that aren't scalable, that is problematic. I wholly admit that. However, what I know to be true is when you invest your time and energy in solving problems that are 7 problems down the road, you may not even get to those problems. I've had people getting stuck on this kind of thing when they don't have enough of the current clients to even keep themselves totally booked. So before we invest in custom designing a back-end system to in an automated way, keep track of it, how about we get you 4 or 5 clients?
Well, no, and I'll tell you that it's funny because I hadn't thought about this in years, but my dad, as you know, was an attorney. He was a sole practitioner in a small town right outside of Annapolis. And so it was really just him and his secretary for a while. He opened up his second office, but a very small operation. Well, he decided, of course, that he needed to assign file numbers because he was doing things alphabetically. And it was hard when you had all these, it was back in the days of just hard copies, not just on computer. And it was hard fitting another B into this drawer and moving everything down. So he needed file numbers. But then he decided, he got paralyzed on this. And I remember he got paralyzed on this for so long because he decided, wait. So I can have a client number and a matter number, which makes total sense. But then I can have a letter designation for what kind of case it is. So D for domestics, or P for personal injury, or A for adoption, or whatever. And then if they come from, this is literally true, if they come from like Glen Burnie, or if they come from, all these different areas.
So
geographic designation. And then, but it would be great to know because, you want to make sure you treasure all your clients, but you want to make sure that the older clients, are the ones that you really pay special attention to. So if we build in the date of origin for these clients, so I know that they came to us in this year or this month, whatever. And I'm looking at, and it was a 12 character designation. Right. And I was working there as a law clerk, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Because he had spent so much time in his office tucked away because this is part of what he liked to do.
It is like a mad scientist kind of thing that can happen.
Very proud of it.
Yeah.
And we had these back and forth. I'm like, I don't even know how to organize these things and what this all means. And then I have to consult a manual every time a client comes in on how to figure out how to assign it to a client number.
Yeah. No, and it's funny because when I was talking about the sort of like, let's find you 4 or 5 clients first, I could hear the tone of my voice that might make it sound like I'm being like hoity indignant about this. Let me tell you, I have done this myself a million times where you, on a more personal note, just because I love this story and I end up using it quite a lot with clients when I sort of observe them in these kind of behaviors. I was long before Paul and I got married, I was visiting my cousin in Seattle, and they had moved around a bunch because of the military. And because of that, she had 3 kids, and they kept, I'm sure this is quite common problem for military families or anybody who moves around a lot. They kept having this problem where like her son would have learned something last year, but then when they moved, that school was teaching it this year, but he might have missed something altogether that he missed in a year. And so their education was getting really spotty and redundant and had Swiss cheese holes in it, whatever. So she decided to homeschool. And I was kind of fascinated by the idea of homeschooling. And, again, pre-married, no kids. Like I was just fascinated by the idea. So she and I are sitting there at our coffee table, at our breakfast table, and we're talking about homeschooling, and she's showing me how she does it. And I was like, oh, this would be so cool. And frankly, I think I was just really into the office supplies kind of aspect of it, to be honest, knowing myself now.
I do love office supplies.
So we were, because that was, so I'm like, ooh, we could have binders. And like, but, so I was looking, and then immediately though, I was like, I don't know. I was like, there's only so many, I can imagine, like, I can't teach like advanced high school chemistry or whatever. And plus I'm worried about the social aspect of it when they're in high school or whatever. And my cousin looks at me, and she's, what you don't know is she has one of the best like deadpan faces of any humor. Her eyes were just like, she was born to have a sarcastic face when she talks to you. And I might include a picture of her in the show notes just for this. But she looks at me with this deadpan face, and she's like, so let me get this straight. She reminded me a tiny bit of like April from Parks and Rec. I don't know if you know that character. She goes, so let me get this straight. You're worried about the high school chemistry, your ability to teach high school chemistry to children that have not even been born yet. And that is why you're not going to homeschool. And I was like,
yes.
Yeah, maybe first I should have kids. She goes, you could homeschool for like a couple years if it was interesting to you. You don't have to. So I think of that sort of like 5, 6, 7, 8 problems out. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with kind of zooming out there and looking at those things. But and I'm sure all of our listeners will agree that I was right about the bamboo, that
we can throw a poll up there and see.
I think we should. And clearly, you know what the right answer is. It's like, I get that putting the bamboo over in this other place did create a problem for later, although not a problem in terms of the floodwaters, because it's a part where the water doesn't go. It's something that we'd have to clean up later. Because literally his argument was, if we pile stuff over there, it will eventually turn to dirt. Which is true, but that's like a year or 2 from now. It'll be dirt. He's like, and then we'll have a mound of dirt there, and we don't want that. I'm like, agreed, but like,
priority problem.
I just want to make sure that tomorrow, when this area floods,
we're not wading through the basement.
We're not wading through the basement. So anyway, I think that sort of zooming in and out as any kind of business leader to like, it's always important to look out to the future unintended consequences. And we've done a whole episode on like unintended consequences. So I think it's worthwhile to look out into those sort of like things I'll need to worry about later. But to stop short of making decisions based on those out there things. The way I always think of it is bringing somebody back, because it's paralyzing to think of all the possibilities out there. I always think of it as solving your first next problem.
Well, and the kind of other side to that, the caveats that I would put on that are certain things I know you agree with. So for example, there's a different calculus when you're buying a building. So for example, you've got to think about the problems you may have 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road.
Absolutely.
Because you've got that.
Absolutely.
But and also even in my world, if I'm doing a shareholder agreement, say, and I know this is a small company, it's only got 2 stockholders now, they've got one, location and a small, but I also know, generally speaking, they're going to put this in a drawer and they're never going to look at it until something major happens. And a lot of times when a trigger event happens, it's too late to go back and change it because somebody has skin in the game on how this is going to work out. So you do have to look ahead. So there are those limitations. The other thing that I learned is if I present the good enough, it depends how I present the good enough. So if I said to a client that, I could do a 50-page contract that would go into all of these details and protect you from all of these risks, but I don't really think that's what you need right now. Many of the more experienced people will say, you're right, I don't need a 50-page contract. I just need to deal with the priorities that are right in front of me, the risks that are right in front of me, and I'll deal with things down the road. But it's many of the inexperienced, many of the people new in business have this fear of missing out. What's on the 47 pages that are not going to be there? Maybe we do need this 50 pages. And I think it's with experience also comes the comfort level in accepting a certain amount of risk of priorities not met.
It's huge because absolutely. Because not knowing what you don't know is a huge, scary, risky area. So I absolutely get that. I think where I most get my hackles up on this issue is less about big things like that. Because you're right, there's absolutely value and worth in doing due diligence on big moves for sure. It's I think the litmus test I look for is when it's getting in the way of just taking the next step for something. Or, when somebody wants to spend a bunch of time getting ready for the deluge of clients that will come in, I'm like, or go get some clients, and in the meantime, they're struggling to get their business where they need to, or, things like that where, because I really do believe that it's almost like a chess game. You move a piece and the whole game changes. So you really can't predict exactly what's happening now. That's probably a terrible metaphor for some people who can think like 8 chess moves ahead. Clearly, that's not how my brain works. But there is something. There's a what's the word I want? There's like a flexibility of quickly figuring out what you need to know, making some kind of small action step move even, and then reassessing. It's I don't know. It just feels like a different kind of dance move rather than trying to get everything locked up 4 steps in advance and then moving your chess piece.
Well, I think that part of it has to do with addressing the baggage that comes with opening up the good enough conversation.
Yeah.
Because you have to be in a place where you don't judge yourself as being somehow deficient for opening up the good enough conversation, and where the people that you're working with in that particular moment understand the motivation behind the good enough conversation.
Well, I'll tell you another place that comes up that comes with just as much emotional baggage is when it comes to, this is back to the architecture days. We would negotiate on scope. So if someone didn't like our price, right. We didn't cut the price, we cut scope.
The value engineering.
Yeah. We said, okay, well, we're not going to do that, or we're not going to do this, or we won't. there were different ways we did it, but or maybe we won't attend weekly construction meetings. Maybe we'll come every other week, or, we would cut the scope to fit their budget and within agreement with them. Well, when you do that, and I really do believe that's a good way to go about things, but then you do have to hold those lines. Like, this is what somebody, like, they didn't want that. They didn't value that enough to pay for it. So we can't just go ahead and toss that in. So there's the sort of levels of, this is what they bought. And that can feel so awful, being like, nope, I think you'd benefit from this, but I'm not giving it to you. Now, to be fair, we always tended to do more than we had bargained for, but not necessarily everything that the client who was paying for everything was doing. So I think those kind of any industry where you have levels of service, it's, even though it's documented in some way, I think it's still hard to hold those lines about what's good enough.
But what I really like, actually, to return to what you just said, is your example of the value engineering, your example of cutting back the scope, because I think that's such a good illustration in most anything, because I know from my work on the construction law side of things and being in these meetings that somebody says, okay, we've got to lower the budget by X number of dollars. And the whole construction team comes back, the architects and the GC might come back and say, okay, if we take this off, or we do this, or we don't do this, or whatever. And there comes a point when there's a bridge too far. The architect says, we could save this money if we just eliminate the covered portico. Mm-hmm. And the owner says, no, because to the owner, that there's a client service part of pulling up and never getting touched by the elements, and you walk in. So it's a fascinating exercise as you watch the layers of nice to have be peeled away just to expose the need to haves and where they are, and then building to that. So here we go. You have hit on the nugget of like nice to have versus need to have. And I think where Paul and I often get into it on house projects is probably because of his professional background. It's harder for him to peel back from what I would consider nice to have. Well, and actually, to be fair, his need to have is at a different level than my need to have. Which happens,
I want to just make sure we sort of solve the current problem, do more than just solve the current problem, but maybe not necessarily fix it to like n million trillionth degree to like, perfectly do it. I wish I could think of a really good example, but of course I'm not thinking of one right now. But it'd be one of those things like, oh, hey, we could fix that socket or whatever. And he's like, well, while we're doing that, we really ought to just like tear out the whole electrical system. I'm like, no, because that's not happening for like a long time. But like, right. But I don't want to sit without a fixed socket,
right?
Because I made that up. That's not really an example, but it's that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know, but like, but we're not going to do all that. That's it. But we're not going to do all that. So if we're not going to do all that, and the alternative is not do anything. But I think that understanding where different people have different need to haves versus nice to haves, I think that's where the debate often
it is. I mean, a simple example is with my kids and carrying the laundry upstairs, because we have our laundry room upstairs. The need to have is the top of the steps, but for us, the need to have is in the laundry room. It's a subtle difference, but very important.
Yeah, my son is wonderful about bringing his dishes up from downstairs, because that's where his like little hangout space is. But he brings them up and then he'll leave them like on the top banister of the step or on the kitchen table. And I'm like, could you not walk
his
them
need to have
forward? Is out of his space.
And your need to have is different.
It's like all the way in the dishwasher.
That's the conversation to have. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of
Lovingly
ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.